Well, if you go back over the last 20 or 30 years, you find that U.S. policy in the area of nuclear energy has changed a lot. It probably started back in the 1970s after the non-proliferation issue became a major factor and the U.S. abandoned commercial reprocessing. President Carter stopped commercial reprocessing and initiated the search for a high-level waste repository to dispose of spent fuel. And that work got started in about 1986 during the Reagan administration and has continued for quite some time. But in the interim, we also looked at things like integral fast reactors during the 1980s to try to find an alternative to commercial reprocessing. But that work was terminated by President Clinton. And so you see this pattern of one administration starting something, another administration ending it, doing something else. In the Bush administration, Yucca Mountain was a big priority. In the Obama administration, Yucca Mountain was stopped. President Trump has announced that he would like to restart the Yucca Mountain project. So, this back and forth characteristic is something we've seen over the course of time. And it's a bit unfortunate because anything you do in the nuclear area usually takes about a decade. And if you make changes every 2 or 3 years, you really don't make much progress. So I think that what we're seeing today is really just kind of continuation of that. And whether the Trump administration can establish policy which will endure over the course of time, I guess we'll have to see. We've looked very closely at the issue of how renewables have impacted the market for nuclear and other baseload power plants. And what we have seen in the US and Europe and other places is that there's a variety of factors changing the electricity market. Obviously, cheap natural gas has suppressed the top price, so the profit margins are much lower. But what you see happening with renewables is that they tend to take the floor out of the prices. And in some parts of the US and some parts of Europe, you routinely see zero or negative pricing for electricity. And this really creates a very, very difficult situation for power companies because there's no money in their systems to pay for new investment in plants and transmission and other things unless they get support from the government. So the idea that markets now can't sustain investment is a very problematic outcome and is probably unsustainable over time. So we have to see whether the markets are adjusted to accommodate the renewables in a way that makes baseload power plants viable, or whether we continue to see baseload power plants going offline. And if we do, we might have situations in Europe and the US that we see happening in Australia today where you have these major power outages. So this is a long-term issue that has to be looked at by governments around the world. Well, in the aftermath of the accident in Japan, which was a very significant event, power companies and regulators around the world looked very closely at the lessons learned from that accident and have responded very quickly to try to employ all the new lessons and all the new safety precautions that are necessary. What I would say about the accident in Japan is that it didn't really prove anything to us about nuclear power plants we didn't know before. There was no surprises in terms of nuclear technology. But what it showed us was that we have to protect nuclear plants from those once in a 100,000-year event, the flood or the earthquake or the tsunami that's far, far beyond what you had expected. You have to have resilience to recover from those kinds of events, and that's what we've done over the last several years. We've put that resilience in place around the world, and I think our confidence level is very high that a Fukushima type event will never happen again.